Okay, it seems that my audio is working. Good. So welcome everybody to this webinar organized by the Platform of E-Mobility, Solutions for Smooth Integration of E-Mobility into the Grid. We want to talk about a couple of topics today, about the importance of coordination and collaboration when it comes to integrating e-mobility into the grids, the support for network operators, DSOs in particular, and lastly, but not least, future-proof standards to foster smart and flexible EV charging. We have a couple of exciting panelists on stage that I will present to you in a bit. Maybe a quick word about the Platform of E-Mobility. We are a coalition of stakeholders, EU associations and companies that basically try to foster the case and related policy frameworks for clean and sustainable e-mobility in all modes. My name is Paul Wilczek. I'm the chair of the working group Energy in this platform, and in my daily work life, I'm the head of energy policy that deals also with e-mobility at Eurelectric, the association of power utilities here based in Brussels. Great. So welcome everybody, and looking forward to the discussion. The format of the discussion is basically as follows. I will ask a very few questions to our panelists that I will introduce shortly. And we have also a special panelist, a special guest from the European Commission, Adriana Gut. So very pleased to welcome you here too, that will reflect on these questions along these three thematic clusters. Good. And then you as the audience have also the opportunity to ask some questions in the chat, and also at the end of the webinar. We can play it by ear there a little bit. So we have only until 10:45, so let's get cracking on. Good. So these are, so to speak, my interviewees, and I see also Adriana. Welcome. And my interviewees are firstly Pedro Gomes from Polis. And maybe I introduce you also a little bit, Adriana. You're a policy officer from DG Energy, and you deal also in your daily work life there specifically on the network code topics. We have currently the demand side connection network code out. I think that's very important for anybody working in the e-mobility sector. And you're also dealing with flexibility issues, market design issues, and related topics. So welcome here, and great to have you in this webinar. Good, but let's then start with Pedro. Hi Pedro, and welcome here. Pedro, you are working in Polis, based in Brussels. You're the lead of on network clean vehicles in air quality cluster. This is basically about Polis. It's the leading network of European cities and regions. And obviously the question for you would be here, of course, the question of integrating e-mobility into the grids is a very complex one, and there's many players involved. And here we're looking at local authorities. So how do you manage, and what would be your recommendations and suggestions when it comes to local authorities managing uncertainties related to different types of EV charging stations, EV recharging as a general principle in various locations? What, in your view, is the importance and role to play in coordination and collaboration? Give us your thoughts.
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we are now past the initial hiccups. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity. As you mentioned, Polis, we are a network of cities, so that's my role here in this discussion. So not from the pure technical point of view, but also bringing the perspective of the local and regional authorities. And what I can say is that although things are improving and we've seen the development of charging infrastructure throughout Europe and increased cooperation, there's still much to learn and to do from the point of view of the local authorities. If you look at the most recent data from the European Alternative Fuels Observatory, the current half-year day targets are being met, but if we look into the future and the expected 30 million electric vehicles in 2030, according to the Green Deal, if we do not accelerate the uptake of charging infrastructure, this might be a problem, a major issue that will hinder the adoption of electric vehicles and decarbonization of the transport sector. But this needs to be done in a smart and effective way, as most of this will be installed in urban areas and cities. I can give examples, for example, how sometimes this coordination doesn't happen or happens in a non-effective way. On my own personal story, when we were trying in the municipality where I was working for installing fast chargings for installations for taxis, and we had the agreement with the central government, we had chosen a location, but then there was no nearby substation or point of connection with the required capacity. So this requires the investments, and who pays for this? So this was a huge bottleneck. And without addressing these bottlenecks, either the permitting or the grid connection, we will not be able to implement the AFIR targets in an effective way. And clearly, as you said, coordination is one of the main bottlenecks between not just the public authorities, but charge point operators, DSOs, and all the other stakeholders. And I believe that the platform recommendation for establishing a blueprint for recharging infrastructure led by the public authorities, but involving all these stakeholders, is a step in the right way. Cities are already doing some of this. So I can give some examples like Utrecht, Turku, Stockholm, for example. They have now developing predictive planning approaches instead of the demand-driven initial approach. So they identify the most suitable charging locations based not only on the current, but also future needs, but also the grid capacity utilization rate. And they cooperate with the grid operators and also ensure predictability to all actors, including the DSOs and the CPOs. But as I said, there's still much to learn and do from the point of view of local authorities.
Yeah, thanks, Pedro. I was going to ask you about these examples, but you gave them already of good examples in some cities how this is done. You mentioned also, yeah. You mentioned also this blueprint. Can you say a bit more about the blueprint? What you were saying about this sounds like a very good practice, doesn't it?
Yes, so this blueprint basically is an approach to help the local authorities. Basically, should be a document led by local authorities, but designed together with all relevant stakeholders. So basically, planning rules for the implementation of the charging infrastructure, not just in cities, but also in other areas like suburbs, peri-urban areas, highways, etc. So basically, this would mean assess the requirements, the needs, the location, and then what types of chargers and what power should be needed. And then basically looking into what is there now and what should be in the future. And if this can inform, for example, sustainable urban mobility plans, then it will be a perfect way to connect sustainable mobility and electromobility, because these two things must come hand in hand. And I think this recommendation from the platform also is very much aligned with some work that has been done recently by ad hoc groups of experts like the Sustainable Transport Forum, of which several platform members are also being part of. This brings together, it's an initiative from the Commission, it brings together these different stakeholders and publishes recommendations. There's a specific group for public authorities, and we recently have published recommendations for streamlining the permitting and grid connection procedures. And this was coordinated by Polis, but had a cooperative work of very a diverse group of stakeholders, and emphasizes precisely the importance of early cooperation between these authorities and the market players. Otherwise, it will not be possible to do long-term grid planning or to stimulate investment that is actually aligned with sustainable urban mobility plans of cities and regions. There are some concrete examples in the document, so good practices. I definitely recommend. I can maybe share the link in the end.
That would be valuable. Yeah, absolutely. I think most of our webinar guests would be definitely interested in that and seeing this. Thanks for that, Pedro. Maybe turning to you, Adriana, for a short reflection from the policy side, from the Commission. I know it's maybe something very specific when we are talking about such a blueprint, but maybe going again on a more general level, collaboration and coordination. How do you see this complexity at the Commission, and is there anything in terms of suggestions you have already on your side on this?
Good morning also from my side. I hope you can hear me. I think Pedro touched upon a very important point that in the future, with the development of renewables and increased electrification of end users, we really need to have lots of assets connected at DSO level. And this also means that we have a different way of operating. So there is a great need for additional investments, but not just investments, also a smarter way of managing the energy system we have at hand right now. So I think concerning the overall situation we are faced with is very clear, but now it's to see how to achieve this right amount of investments and how to ensure transparency on the current situation. So I might also raise your awareness towards the electricity market design reform, which requests further transparency on available grid connection. So especially on DSO level, I think we have quite a well-established framework for union-wide planning of the transmission grid, but now this shall also be put further on DSOs. So they also need to issue national development plans. This is already a requirement from the Clean Energy Package from 2019, but it will be further specified in the Network Code Demand Response. So we hope that this all helps to have transparency on the current situation. And in case grid connection is scarce, we also allowed for a new tool, so to say. Not a new tool, but we specified how to apply flexible connection agreements. So national regulatory authorities shall set the framework to define when to really allow these flexible connection agreements, because it's a bit of an interplay between market-based probably congestion management, or also addressing the connection constraints in a very local level. And just because Pedro was also talking about AFIR especially, so of course this AFIR sets mandatory deployment targets for each member states, and these targets constitute what co-legislators believe were sufficient to ensure the lack of infrastructure. We also see that in some markets which are more developed, the charging infrastructure and the rollout happens without any public support. So it's purely market driven. But we also have to admit there are some changes or challenges concerning fast chargers. And the Commission is monitoring the deployment and will review AFIA in 2026. And the investments are still needed in fast recharging infrastructure. And there's also some way of additional funding provided for this. Huh?
Yeah, no, very interesting. Thanks, Adriana. You raised some very important topics. The distribution network development plans, indeed, they were already in the electricity directive, I remember. Now it's reinforced, so it's obligatory for a lot of DSOs that we have in Europe, over 2,400, I believe. And also the flexible connection agreements, which I believe is also quite a heterogeneous picture in Europe, because some regulators don't allow them and some regulators allow them. Then curious to see how this further develops. But I think here we are moving nicely into the distribution grid area in any case. And maybe I give here also then the question to Zeni Varfi. Zeni is Deputy Secretary General of ETSO, one of the European DSO associations in Brussels. Zeni, here opening the discussion to you as well. You come from the DSO perspective, and here, of course, the DSO have a very central role to play when it comes to connections and grid development and grid planning, obviously. However, you are regulated. So here we go with this conflict line of what do you need from governments on policy in general, and also looking at the European level, so you are encouraged properly to plan and invest early enough for all these new uses, be it e-mobility, heating, whatever, which will be electrified, to have the grids ready in the future. So do you have enough? And if not, what else do you need to be encouraged and allowed basically to plan and invest in time and in sufficient amounts?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me. I hear myself twice, so that's normal.
We only hear you once, so that's okay.
Okay, it might be on my side then. Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I want to aspects that have been touched upon by Pedro and by the Commission. They are interesting because it follows up exactly on the point you raised, Paula. So the electromobility is one of the big challenges for DSOs in our time. So the main challenge we encounter compared to the heating, for instance, is that double as fast as we can build a grid network or infrastructure. Hence, we have been spotted many times the idea of that we need grid investments. That message has been clarified and heard by the Commission and other stakeholders. But it's not only that. And indeed, AFIR and EMD made it possible for us in a framework, legal framework, to have a sense that we need three main issues from the governance or in conjunction with the government. So regulatory side, which is now in place and needs to be implemented if you're in both EMD. Then, of course, a financial aspect, investments. If it is anticipatory, even better. And the last one is stakeholder engagement on national plans, development plans, as you rightly pointed out. Now it is mandatory also for the DSOs. But one thing related to capacity which we encounter is that apart from flexible connection agreements, that now they are in a temporary basis. Indeed, as you said, Paul, in some countries they are not allowed to become permanent, in some others yet, because it's also the role of regulatory, national regulatory authorities to see whether grid development is needed, or instead the flexible connection agreement from temporary became permanent. But that engenders the discussion whether the project promoter or whomever, for instance, if CPOs will pay the grid for using the grid. The other problem that we have raised with DSOs is use it or lose it principle. It's quite interesting because we just realized that there are some possible grid users that don't use the full capacity allowed to them. And that is problematic when we speak about congestion, because on one side we are thinking we are congested, and the other side we have clients we don't use it properly. And that requires us, together with NRS, so basically the governments, to see whether we can adjust the contracts and to reduce the capacity so the clients use it more cautiously and efficiently. So I would say from the framework side, where overall what is needed for us is first to talk and to engage more in a regular basis with NRS, because it is not the case for every country. Secondly, the legislation to be implemented accordingly, because now we are in the implementation stage. And the third one, we realize that there is a full chain of communication from municipalities to CPOs to the project promoters of EV charging. If there is disruption in communication with one of the stakeholders, then the whole chain is disrupted, and then we have a problem of congestion.
Yeah. I see. Your sound was a bit chopped up, I believe, for some of the viewers. I could kind of follow your explanations, what you said. But just to say, it's you reiterated the views about, or the problems about, flexible connection agreements. There is the need to clarify this, basically. Can existing connection agreements become flexible in the future, and how do we go about implementation? Because there's a lot of DSOs, and some are big, some are small, some have resources, some have some very small, so they can't just do a network development plan necessarily for the first time in their business lives. So this is just a very short whirlwind reiteration of what Zeni just said, for those who couldn't maybe hear it so well. Implementation and resources, and also the proper incentives, I suppose, for DSOs are key here, so that so they are not penalized, basically, when they are doing these anticipatory investments. I suppose this is the punchline here. Maybe here also turning to Adriana. This is, of course, an issue that we see in these regulated businesses. So they are supposed now to do something very differently as opposed to what they did, which was a cost-saving approach, which was connecting, the users that were there. But now it means connecting many, many more users and much faster. And they have obligations, of course, such as these development plans. My simple question, or not so simple, is this enough from the European level, in your view? What else can be done, or what does the Commission plan to do, or has in the pipeline, or as ideas to further support network operators, especially on the distribution side, on low and mid voltage level in this regard?
I mean, we are very much aware of the challenges faced by DSOs. And we also see a high risk that if we do not get the remuneration and the tariff design right, then it might really be a burden for electrification decarbonization. But at the same time, it's very much a national competency. Tariff design and the eligibility of system costs really lie on the member states and the national regulatory authorities. But still, we hope to provide, we did provide some principles and rules to push towards the right direction. So, the electricity market design strengthens the role of anticipatory investments. That it clearly states, at least in the recitals, that these should be put to allow for the right incentives for system operators, short and long term, so to promote really efficient investments. And then it is, of course, on national regulatory authorities to recognize all relevant costs as eligible, but we push towards a TOTEX approach, so to put capital and operational costs on the same level. So to say not just to put wires and cables and copper instead of smart solutions, or even to procure flexibility services. Then we really see the need to further clarify the role for flexibility procurement. There is a new network code in the pipeline, and network code on demand response. And this will also touch upon the interplay between different tools, such as flexible connection agreements, potentially also curtailment. So how to use really the most efficient procurement of services by DSOs and TSOs when faced with congestion problems.
Yeah, I was going to say the network code demand side connections is now out for public consultation, I believe. This is,
ASA is currently consulting the network code demand response.
Yes. So for all viewers of this webinar, please be aware of this, and there is that's certainly important to have a look at this public consultation, and quite an important network code. These are direct. This is a direct regulation. I might maybe add that will be implemented directly as your national law. So definitely an important network code for anybody working on EV charging stations. Thanks for that. And also we are going maybe more into this realm of network code, in fact, and technical requirements. And here I'm turning to Luca de Brucker from ECOS. Welcome also, Luca, to this panel. Luca, you're a senior program manager at ECOS. This is the Environmental Coalition on Standards. It's an international environment NGOs. You focus on technical standards. So you're working on technology, and you're looking obviously also into EVs and how to integrate them into the grid. Maybe give us your thoughts, if you could, on the standardization question, also with regards to this ongoing network code, to the regulatory layer at European level, smart metering, smart charging. What is needed in your view, also in terms of harmonization, be it harmonized standards or harmonized rules at EU level for EV and charging points integration?
Thanks, Paul. Many questions. So yeah, first of all, I can start by just saying that obviously the advantages of smart charging are now very clear. I don't think I need to repeat them, but obviously for smart charging to work, we need the technology to work. We need to ensure that electric vehicles can actually exchange information, share data with charging stations, and also the entire ecosystem behind it, the charge point operator, the backend, the roaming systems, they all need to have a way to communicate in a uniform way. And this is where technical standards come in. So this is what ECOS focuses on. We follow the technical standards that are necessary to allow the communication, so that electric vehicles, charging stations, and all the actors involved speak the same software language. So these are codified in protocols, and these can be standardized, and those standards can be harmonized. So it's important to standardize these protocols and to harmonize those standards to avoid vendor lock-in, because obviously if there is no uniform way to communicate and to exchange data, then companies obviously will implement their own systems, and then we have a risk of vendor lock-in. We have a risk of equipment not being compatible. So obviously here, the role of harmonized standards is really important. Now, this of course doesn't mean that we need to harmonize just any standard. The standard should be future-proof. And this is something that we cannot emphasize more, we really need to be sure that what we are choosing to implement now, the standards that we want to be harmonized, that they are future-proof. And what we mean with that is that innovation should be possible within those standards, in the sense that it's not enough to just implement a list of use cases that are known now. There should be a way so that the way that the grid will evolve, that those new ways of communicating and new ways of incentivizing people to use electricity at a certain point, that those can actually be incorporated in the standards through software updates. So this is for the technical standards themselves. Now, regarding regulation, it's important to know that the European Commission already in 2020, so it's quite some years ago, already started the process to have what is called a standardization request. And that's a process where the European Commission asks standardization organizations in Europe, which are CEN and CENELEC, to develop or put forward standards that could be a candidate for harmonization. So this was done under the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive at the time, that now evolved into a regulation, as everybody on this webinar is well aware of. So, and this has been a really important step, because there we see that a very important standard for bidirectional charging to allow vehicle to grid will most likely, we will have to see the final text, but will most likely be harmonized quite soon. Of course, on other fronts within the standardization request, other let's say elements of the ecosystem where different equipment needs to be able to communicate to each other, there we see communication standards that are not ready yet. And we also see some communication standards being put forward for harmonization that may not be fit for purpose. So this is really an area to look at. Then you also asked about the grid codes, Paul. So
yes.
Indeed.
That's another good. That's another, of course, topical point. The grid codes, I think they're different than the standards. Maybe as a
exactly.
right? So
they are different.
They're binding. Yes. Go ahead. Sorry.
So indeed, the grid codes themselves, at the moment, they don't set standards. They are not technical standards as such. It's more a way to harmonize, to the extent possible. I think Adriana can tell us a bit more, but to the extent possible, specific rules for connection of, for instance, charging stations. And there, so I think we can say that the current drafts that we've seen from Acer, they now do include electric vehicles. So that's really good. That's an improvement for sure, because electric vehicles and charging stations, they were not in there yet. So there were actually no rules to safely connect these. So that's a step in the right direction. Now, it's obviously very important that electric vehicles, when they are connected, that they can behave safely in an emergency situation, and that they can also remain connected. And this is also something where the network codes can play a role. Then moving to standards again. So the network codes at the moment, they don't mention standards. It could be something for in the future, but that's maybe something for Adriana to address. But I can just say that standards can play a role there, because also there is a standard series that actually that gives standardized ways to implement rules that are now also in the network codes. That set of standards is actually covering much more than what is in the network codes. But by harmonizing those standards, member states can actually see which harmonized rules are possible to be harmonized across Europe. So that's important, because they can provide an inspiration for member states, so that bit by bit we can move to harmonized rules across Europe.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Luca. Yeah, I was always intrigued by this, by the interplay between the EU network codes, the national grid codes, the standards, and the EU harmonized standards. So there are 4 different things, if I understood this correctly, and they all need to kind of interplay well together. However, of course, I think the strictest layer that we have right now are still the EU network codes. They are binding regulation, basically, that is implementable directly, and they can refer to some standards. But that's something that's basically in the hands of the policymakers, if this is done like that or not. Maybe then turning to Adriana. The EU network code on demand-side connection. I think this is the crucial one for e-mobility, because this includes already EV charging operators, EV charging stations. Maybe actually as a sort of explanation for the audience, can you say what's in there for EV charging stations? I know it has requirements now that are binding for EV charging stations that are of technical nature, of course, such as voltage support and when to disconnect, etc. Right? I also know that some players in the e-mobility world say, "Oh, this is a bit rigorous. We didn't expect that. What do we need to do now?" So this is a bit maybe as an information question for the audience, and also, yeah. Coming back to Luca's intervention, how do you see this interplay between the network codes, which are binding, and the standards, which are per nature non-binding, right?
Yeah. So I myself are not one of the leading experts on the network code for demand connection, but I mean, normally coming also from the history of these connection codes, it was really about like having in mind a safe operation of the grid. So when these appliances should deconnect, connect, and I mean very on quite a high level, because most member states, as you said, go then even deeper into that, followed by national terms and conditions or national regulations. So the demand network code is not going to the level of setting standards yet, but I mean, we also receive a lot of push from stakeholders to push for technical standards for data communication, but having in mind also the flexibility on the future proofness which such a standard should have, it can be questioned if to prescribe it directly in this secondary legislation is the right step, but maybe as an annex, or even then to be further discussed in subgroups. So as it stands right now with the demand connection code, I mean, the Commission received the proposal from ACER, and there is still discussions ongoing. So ACER and a working group of EV manufacturers is still maybe submitting changes to what we have currently received to clarify the situation. And then also we see if it's possible, or if it's a smart way forward to put technical standards directly in this network code. And then, of course, we have also an implementing act on interoperability. I mean, one was already on metering, and the other one is on demand response. It will be submitted also next year. So in 2025, the Commission will have the demand response network code as well as this implementing act on demand response at the same time, and then to ensure consistency. The question is if these legal documents can enter into the level of technical standards, but then we also have this data for energy expert group. So, I mean, these working groups are normally more suitable to have a big discussion among experts to ensure that it's not just system operators submitting a network code, but to ensure that all stakeholders are aware and have been heard and listened to. So this working group demand data for energy will also take 3 different use cases. In one will be flexibility in energy systems, but the other one will smart and bidirectional EV charging. So it will kick off in October, I think. So we really hope that this working group will also help to clarify all the situation on technical standards.
Thanks, Adriana. That's very interesting. Also, there's basically ongoing work. We all thought European legislation is at a stop, but no, it's not. Secondary legislation and implementation is ongoing, as you all hear. That's very interesting, and we are looking forward, of course, to see then the final network code that comes into force then very shortly as well. I will use a few minutes here also a bit to open up suggestions and questions from the audience. I see the chat has become active here. A question here probably to Luca is, can you tell us more about the harmonized standard for bidirectional charging? What is that about?
Yes, of course. So this is the ISO 15118-20. I can put that in the chat later on. So this is a standard that is finalized at the international ISO level for more than 2 years now, and then it was also brought to the European level. So it is what is called an EN standard. Then at the moment, the European Commission, moved more specific implement under AFIR.
I think you're chopping up.
Where this would basically provide ways to implement the technical specifications of Annex 2 of AFIR. So this becomes a little bit technical, but so when this is done, it would mean that from a specific timing, that could be 2026 or 2027, all new and renovated charging stations will have to implement this standard. And that's a good thing, specifically for the bidirectionality, because it would mean that those charging stations will be capable of bidirectional charging, so reversing the power flow between, so that not only charging is possible, but also discharging. But it's important to say that this standard is not only making vehicle-to-grid possible, it is also making smart charging and charging in general much better. There are ways.
I think we lost you, Luca.
Okay.
Can you repeat the 2 last sentences, or you are a bit chopped up there?
Hello?
Yes. We have. I hear you again, but your camera is frozen, I believe. No, not at all now. I think we lost you, but I think here is also some references to the ISO standard that Luca just mentioned. I think now you're back. Okay.
Okay, hi. Can you tell me where you lost me?
Your last 3 sentences, but please, can you conclude in 1 minute, more or less? So
I can say it's a very important standard, and the Commission is looking into harmonizing it, which is great. And I can talk to anyone who wants to have more information.
Okay, great. And your suggestion is that this standard is referenced in the new demand-side connection code?
No. So this is,
okay.
No, I'm not talking about connection codes here. I'm talking about a delegated AFIR. So no connection to the grid codes.
Okay. Good. Thanks for the clarification. Good. No, it's indeed a layer of complexity that we need to be very well aware of. The role of standards, which standards interplay with which secondary legislation at European level, and how is this implemented after all. So thanks a lot for these hints. Looking at the chat again, if there's thanks a lot, Adriana. This is the link to the network code public consultation. So I encourage everybody to check it out. How will this standard make smart charging easier? Sorry, Luca, that's probably again for you.
Yeah, so it's basically, there are many different features in this standard, but one is that, so if you do smart charging, then there is what you can call a negotiation phase, right, between the charging station and the electric vehicle, because the electric vehicle can say, hey, I need some more electricity, but then it could be a good moment. Maybe there is a lot of sun, but maybe it's not a good moment, or it's a moment to slow down. So these are all factors that are taken into account. Now it's possible that during this negotiation, the charging continues. It doesn't stop. So that's important. So this is one, because at the moment, this judge, and then to the session needs to start again. And this is something that charging as less error message.
Thanks a lot, Luca. I think anybody here can reach out also individually to the panelists here. So also for the interest of time, because we unfortunately have come now slowly to the end of the webinar. I can only say thanks a lot for the super interesting discussion. It was quite short, but super interesting and a lot to follow up on. I just want to say thanks to also the audience for participating here, and also raising attention to the next webinar that takes place basically next week at the very same time, and it's going to be on heavy-duty vehicles and their integration into the grids and charging. And here you see the QR code if you want to sign in already for that. And with that, thanks a lot, Pedro, Luca, Zeni, last but not least, Adriana, super valuable, and that was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.